afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, and welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for October 30th, 2017. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, joined by my colleagues Mr. Englander and Mr. Bonin, and we are ready to begin today's agenda. We have a lot of people in the room, partly because of the FSR and partly because of other matters, I think. So I would just like to remind everyone that as the meeting proceeds, this committee will need to concentrate on the matters before it. Any distractions will not be tolerated. So please silence your cell phones now. Any comments or anything else that distracts the committee from its work, I will ask the person causing that disturbance to leave without further warning. So that will be the way we will work today. And members, I would like to propose items, well, I would have liked to propose items 3 and 4 for consent approval, but we do have public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and dispose of public comment on those items and the multi-items first. And then as we're doing that, you might also consider which departments you would like to hold. And then we'll go ahead and release everybody else to be able to get back to work since we have the FSR on today's agenda item number 6. So we'll go ahead and deal with public comment first. So I'd like to invite up, well, let's do our multi-item speakers first. So Mr. Herman and Mr. Spindler.
Alright, so I get the total of 3 minutes, yes. So item number 1 is the fucking problem in the non-recreation center. You put this synthetic turf field. Why? You're too fucking stupid to water the grass, yes. So the grass died, goats were eating, and they were chewing everything and choked the fuck on it, and then the kids tripped on it. Now the city has to pay damages to rich lawyers, yes. But again, thank you for suing the city. Then you have number 2, a jury verdict in favor of plaintiff Jamie McBride. You people are going to vote to pay? No! The court ordered you to pay, so pay now, bitches. And pay interest and attorney fees now. We don't want to wait for you, the goat, the Debo dwarf, or the recalled diet motherfucking drug addict Bonin. We want the money now. So now we have a tax on businesses that provide digital goods. It's called an internet tax. The puppet opposes all taxes on internet commerce. The puppet is clearly against it. My friends here are clearly against it. Even Bob Blumenfield is against it because he understands the value of e-commerce. Don't let it die. Let it come here. But I have a better idea. All of you, move to the Antelope Valley, talk to Supervisor Catherine Barger. She will give you a better deal than these criminals here, yes. And then finally, the financial status report. City on the verge of bankruptcy. Options, none. City, fucked. Yes. And I get my 1 minute per general. Yes, thank you so much. So as you see, we have here a number of failures here on the panel today. We have Krikorian the goat. We have the 5th place finisher loser, the Debo dwarf Mitchell Englander, who finished 5th. We have Mike Bonin, who's facing a recall for fucking all the roads up in Playa del Rey and Vista del Mar. And then we have Bob Blumenfield, who's on the fence. On the one hand, he wants to represent you. On the other hand, he turns evil and turns to Herb Wesson. Save yourself, Bob. Become a man of the people like you are. Don't become another Herb. See, the three others to the, what is it?
His left.
To the left of you are losers. You can go far and above. You're a very smart man. Thank you, and go Dodgers! Yay!
Mr. Herman.
So you see, back during the time of the synthetic turf, the damages relating to the construction is an obvious recall. Why do I say that? Because it doesn't support animals to eat grass. Rather, it supports damages, another lawsuit. Then I go to item number 2, a matter involving the appeal from the judgment entered by a jury verdict. It should be awarded to all the attorneys, 35% interest in favor against the city of Los Angeles, Jaime McBride. Then I go to item CD14, the fat, bald fuck, Jose Huizar, regarding the fucked up Parker Center demolition phase. Well, how long does it take to fucking tear down a fucking building? I would tear that motherfucker down because back in 2008, that's where I was incarcerated next door, next to that other fucking institution for fucking lies by the Sentinel. And then I go into item number 5, another fucked up motion by the fucking czar, fat, bald fuck, Jose Huizar. Amending section 2141. No, let's amend DOJ codes. This way, there's no Title II, Title III discrimination based on business to provide digital reading in council meetings. But committee impact, none submitted. Then we go into the number 666, something I talked about earlier this morning before Kevin James. City Administrative Office report relative to the first financial status report. I agree with Mr. Spindler. What fucking fiscal report when we're going into bankruptcy? You can't charter money, bond money, to fix the problem that Eric Garcetti has caused the city financial grief. Now, for those of you who are ratepayers and taxpayers, I suggest you file a grievance with the Department of Justice to investigate the officer's report, because I find a deficit ceiling collapse. And that's just not just the budget man's problem, it's the city of Los Angeles problem. We're fucked up. Now into my general fucked up public comment. Now that I got the recall of Mike Bonin, and we got the recall on Englander for fifth place loser to step down because he's a tyrant, constantly agitating Armando Herman, for the record, during general public comment, non-consent items. So I'm not wrong when I'd rather not talk about Mr. Bloomfield's wife because she's a beautiful black woman. You know, it's nothing wrong with.
You won't talk about anyone's wife.
I'm
because
talking
it's not
about
within the
general
jurisdiction
public
of the
comment,
committee,
motherfucker.
And you'll leave.
I'm on the
All right.
fucking topic.
Mr.
What?
Herman is disrupting the meeting. Have him.
How did I still got 30 fucking seconds, bullshit, motherfucker.
You don't talk to
dumb.
me. You talk to the mic. Have him show him the door, please. Show him the door. Mr. Herman is continuing to disrupt the meeting. Show him the door with dispatch, please. He's continuing to disrupt the meeting and delay our proceeding with our work. The clock keeps ticking, and Mr. Herman is still delaying this meeting. Still disrupting the meeting as he's heading out the door, escorted by Los Angeles Police Department. So to the members of the public, this is every week in Budget and Finance Committee, so I apologize to everyone here who is offended by the disgusting display that we saw again, which we see every week. So my apologies. Mr. Spindler, I think you know the way I work here. Be quiet. Sit there quietly, or you'll be asked to go right after your buddy. All right. So that brings up, let's go ahead and take up our consent items, members, I would have proposed items 3 and 4 for consent approval. And with regard to item 3, the recommendation is to concur in the ITGS PAW Committee recommendation to approve. Are there any questions or concerns about those matters? Seeing none, it'll be the action of the committee to approve those items as indicated. We'll go ahead and take up item 6 next, the FSR. And we do have a few cards on that matter. I think I'll go ahead and take the cards first. Then I will ask members to call their department special. Then we'll go ahead and hear from the CAO, and we can let everybody else get back to work if they'd like. So our speakers on this matter, 1 minute each, are Lane Dicker, Christy Metropole, Joe Ocano. So if the three of you could come up, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Dicker, you can start off.
Well, thank you very much. Hard act to follow. My name is Lane Dicker. I'm a member of the Board of Animal Services Commissioners for the City of Los Angeles. Thank you very much for hearing me. I'm here to address funding for the EIR for the cat injunction. I personally have about 25 years experience in animal rescue. I'm trained in social behavior of large dogs, and I will tell you this. These people will tell you much more about what's involved in cat rescue than I can. But what I can tell you is that there are a number of groups throughout this city that are doing the hardest possible work to rescue these kittens, thousands of which otherwise die in our shelters. It would be very hard for us not to fund this EIR and to tell these people that we will not do what we need to help ourselves and that we expect them to do all of the heavy lifting for us. That devalues their contribution, and it would be unfair to these people who work so hard to help us. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Christy Metropole.
Metropole.
Christy Metropole.
Hi.
Sorry. Wait. Followed by Joe Ocano, followed by Vince Wong.
Hi, I'm Christy Metropole, and I run Stray Cat Alliance. I'm also a resident of Mar Vista. I see you at Whole Foods often. The city has allocated $800,000 for this EIR, and there's talk of taking that money away. That will be detrimental. I run an organization that's the largest cat protection rescue organization, definitely in Los Angeles, probably on the West Coast. I am an expert in this. If you take that money away, we will not hit no kill. We will continue to impound, house, and kill animals cats at a huge expense, and we will just be on this cycle. So please do not take this money away. Please support this EIR getting done to the end, and we can then finally do what the mayor wants and what we all want is become a no-kill city. It will not happen if this citywide cat program does not happen. We will not become no-kill.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jose Ocano, followed by Vince Wong, followed by Shri Shankar.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose. I am the Regional Director for Best Friends Animal Society, and I oversee all of our LA programming. In LA, we invest over $8 to $10 million in the LA programming. A lot of that is geared towards the cat programs. Best Friends Animal Society operates more target trap, neuter, return programs than any organization in the country and supports via grants and consulting dozens of similar programs operated by shelters and other animal welfare organizations. We strongly support the citywide cat program being proposed by Los Angeles Animal Services and encourage the council budget and finance committee to preserve the funding allocated earlier this year for the necessary environmental impact report. It's really important that a lot of the funding that Best Friends is putting forward, these are programs for kitten nurseries. These are things that are band-aids to the problem. The long-term sustainable solutions are programs that will not be able to be implemented until the environmental impact report is complete.
Very good. Thank you. Our next speaker is Our next speaker is Vince Wong, followed by Shri Shankar, and that's all the cards I have on item number 5.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you very much. Vince Wong, Policy Director of the Michelson Found Animals Foundation. Like the speakers before me, I'm here to support the EIR and the dollars that have been allocated, the $800,000 towards this EIR. We've been actually in almost 10 years now that the injunction has been in place, and we have an opportunity to actually save thousands upon thousands of cats' lives by completing this EIR, removing that injunction, and becoming a humane, no-kill city, the one that we all want to have. In addition to the operating work that we do grant making for a lot of the organizations such as Gracie Metropol's Stray Cat Alliance. We have an opportunity to keep this money in place, keep this money towards something that we all believe in, making sure to save the lives of cats all over the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Shankar, welcome.
Shri Shankar. So I'm here to object to $500,000 in animal services funds earmarked by the mayor and council for the citywide cat program being transferred to the reserve fund simply because they haven't been spent yet. The EIR process is now underway. There have been public meetings and other public engagement. This EIR is vital to getting the city out from under a court injunction against funding spay-neuter for feral and stray cats, and key to achieving and maintaining no-kill status in the coming years. Suspending the project at this point would actually make the EIR more expensive when the project would have to be restarted once funding could be found at a later time. This would be a poster child for penny wise and pound foolish. This EIR project needs the money more than the reserve fund, and it needs the money now. So please, please keep the money for the EIR. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, that completes public comment on item number 6. And just for the record, is there any public comment on items 1 or 2?
No other public comment.
Okay, so public comment on those items is closed as well. So let's go ahead and bring up the CAO then to present on the FSR. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the order. Members, first let's go through and see if there are departmental requests so we can get folks back to work. Mr. Bonnet?
One, I'd like the Board of Public Works to stay and the Petroleum Administrator for discussion on that. And on the EIR, CAT EIR, I guess Animal Services, City Attorney, City Engineer are the 3 that need to stay.
Okay. Mr. Bloomfield?
Okay, in addition to that, aging, building and safety, you said Board of Public Works, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sanitation, transportation, and the others.
Okay. Mr. Englander?
ITA and LAPD.
Okay.
And I do know that, and I'm not sure how you want to handle it, as the chair, Mr. Kress had submitted some also. He had a question for fire planning and others, but we just received this.
Yeah, it's...
So, but again, he submitted it here on time. But I'm happy to ask a couple of questions. I think there were only a couple of departments that hadn't been called.
Okay.
One was for fire, and I think one was for city planning and personnel. However you'd like to.
If you want to do that, that would be great. Sure. That would be great. So personnel and planning. I'm not sure.
And fire. And fire.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, Mr. Bloomfield, something else? Okay. So, the list of those who we need to stay is Board of Public Works, Animal Services, Engineering, City Attorney, Aging, Building and Safety, Sanitation, Transportation, ITA, LAPD, Fire, Personnel, and Planning. If you were among the very few lucky departments that I didn't just name, thank you very much. See you next time. Thanks for coming down.
Run.
Hurry before we change our mind.
Last time, we didn't have any questions last time. So
Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah.
Well, I think,
And for those of you who are staying, I'm thinking it's still going to be short, despite the fact that we have so many departments. But okay. Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Today we present to you our first financial status report of the fiscal year. This report discusses our year-end closing receipts from last year, also status of the reserve fund at the close of last year, and also a focus on this fiscal year, our expenditures, revenues, and makes recommendations on budgetary adjustments. Our fiscal year has begun with strong reserves. Our reserve fund is currently...
Sorry, folks, I'm sorry, there's a lot of people in this room. If there's even a little bit of conversation, it's really hard to concentrate. So if you have to talk, take it outside, please. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So we've begun with strong reserves. Our reserve fund is currently at 6.09%, or $354.7 million of the general fund budget, and this is above our 5% reserve fund policy. Cumulatively, our reserves, including the Budget Stabilization Fund and the unappropriated balance reserve for mid-year adjustments, are at 8.07%, or $469 million. So while the city's reserves are healthy, it's very important that we maintain these reserves because this is what's going to enable the city to weather various anticipated financial challenges that we've highlighted in this report. Our report highlights issues that we may face this coming year, in addition to issues for the next following fiscal year, 2018-19. For this year, we identify a year-end expenditure shortfall of $29.73 million. We discuss potential risks to revenue and federal funding. We talk about potential unfunded expenditures for the liability claims account and in anticipation that we will exceed our budget for this year in both the liability claims account and the unappropriated balance. Also, there are concerns with special fund reimbursements due to the overpayment of related costs last fiscal year, which will require a true-up this year. And also, looking at 2018-19, the city continues to face a structural deficit, and this is now strained by revised pension assumptions, which could increase the city's pension contributions by $122 million. On top of our previously anticipated $48.1 million.
And just, can you explain what that change in assumption was for the public?
This is a change of both pension boards revised their assumed rate of return. It was reduced from 7.5 to 7.25, and this was part of their experience study analysis. That will have a fiscal impact on fiscal years 18-19, so it will strain the structural deficit. For these reasons, while our reserves are strong, we recommend fiscal prudence, and we caution against using the reserves to offset current year deficits or fund program expansions and service restorations. This report does not recommend any transfers or adjustments to the city's reserves, so this would be inclusive of the reserve fund and the UB reserve for mid-year adjustments. There are no recommendations for transfer from these reserves. We also recommend that city departments manage any potential deficits internally within their existing resources and meet budgeted revenue and proactively pursue new revenue streams. As far as our $29.73 million expenditure shortfall, one of our largest items is the projected shortfall of $13.5 million in the Human Resource Benefit Fund, and this is due to a shortfall in our workers' compensation account. Fire Department has reported an expenditure shortfall of approximately $6.5 million in various accounts. The General Services Department is reporting a $4.1 million shortfall in their leasing and salaries as needed accounts. The Public Works Bureau of Street Services is reporting a $2.22 million shortfall due to a reduction in salary account funding and increased hiring to meet work programs. And the City Attorney, we are projecting a $1.69 million shortfall. However, we'd like to note that this estimate was based on a hiring plan that was presented as of the end of August. We understand that this hiring plan has since changed, so we would expect that the estimate has probably been reduced by this time. It's anticipated that some of these departments will be able to offset some of these shortfalls internally. This would be the case for the Fire Department, General Services, and the Office of the City Attorney, who have reported that they expect to fully offset these shortfalls by year end. So this would be approximately $12.29 million in potential offsets, which would reduce our year-end expenditure shortfall to about $17.44 million. Moving on to revenue, as discussed, we looked at the year-end closing revenue for 2016-17. Our 2016-17 general fund receipts were $17.9 million above plan, and this was largely due to higher former CRA revenue, business taxes, and departmental receipts. And this revenue, which was received above plan receipt, is basically was deposited into the reserve fund and is contributing to our 6.09%. As far as the current fiscal year, based on our review through the end of September, our 2017-18 revenue is at $17 million above plan receipts. However, with only 3 months of revenue data, it is too early in the fiscal year to project our year-end revenue. I'd like to note that most of our receipts, our significant receipts, we will receive probably the second half of the fiscal year. Nevertheless, at this time, we are aware of some revenue shortfalls and downward trends. For example, the Department of Water and Power has reduced its estimate for electricity users tax revenue by $18.8 million. There is also concern that departmental receipts may be further reduced as a result of the overpayment of related cost reimbursements last fiscal year, which will have a reduction to the general fund revenue for this fiscal year due to the need for a true-up. Also, there are revenues that were anticipated in the budget that are still pending and have not been approved and are contingent on policy decisions to be made. For example, billboard revenue. There's also the linkage fee, which I understand it's making its way through the committee and council process, and then planning fee increases. So some of these revenues definitely were included as part of the budget and will require further action or implementation. Moving on to our four-year budget outlook, as discussed, our four-year budget outlook has been updated to reflect the 2017-18 adopted budget. The four-year budget outlook identifies deficits for the next 3 years and a small surplus in fiscal year 2021-22. However, it's important to note that there are some changes that have happened since that time that would further impact this four-year outlook. The projected deficit could be exacerbated by increases in employee costs resulting from current negotiations. The outlook assumes that the size of the workforce will remain flat, that no major increases in city services, and no further salary increases. There are also the recent actions to reduce the assumed rate of return are not reflected in the outlook at this time. Those actions occurred subsequent to the adoption of the budget. So we're looking at about $122 million increase in the city contribution. Our report highlights issues of concern. As discussed, there are issues concerning revenue and pending policy decisions. There are concerns over our liability claims payouts. And, of course, there are concerns regarding actions taken at the federal level that could further complicate our budget outlook this year. Overall, our report recommends budget adjustments of about $136 million. And a large portion of this consists of about $81 million in MICLA reauthorizations. And there's about $4 million in reductions in budget appropriations to EWDD and HSID, and this is due to a reconciliation of available grant funding with budget appropriations. I'd like to point out that there were about $753,000 in requests for reserve fund reappropriations. Any funds that are not encumbered by the end of the year automatically revert to the reserve fund. We looked at the various requests, and our position is not that these activities should not continue in the current fiscal year, but that departments should look internally. It is very early in this fiscal year to start recommending transfers from either the reserve fund or the UB reserve for mid-year adjustments. There are instances when departments will identify savings throughout the year that could potentially offset these requests. And also, in some cases, some of these departments have reverted significant amount of funding at year end. So it would be premature to start making these transfers at this time. We would like to continue to look at expenditures and see how things progress throughout the year because of our concern for all these financial risks that we face for the current year and for the following year. So our recommendation is departments can continue with these activities, but look internally first, and we'll deal with these on a case-by-case basis. We also have...
Just a quick question
yes.
on that, if I could. Because on that, I think you gave us, you highlighted what those were. For example, ITA communication service requests for $101,000. City planning for cannabis regulations. There were only like 4 or 5 of them, I think. But just as an example, what would the ITA communication service request for $100,000 be? And had they already looked internally and there was no other resource for that? I'm just curious. I mean, I agree. It's too early to look at a reserve transfer, but I'm curious as to, it didn't spell out anywhere. I couldn't find anywhere specifically what those items were.
The effort that the department can make to generate savings, or what it was for?
What it was for.
So it was 100,680 reserve fund reappropriation request. It was supposed to be for hiring hall salaries and hiring hall overtime, and it was to enable the department to complete communication services requests for various departments from the prior fiscal year. So these are communication services requests.
So I guess my question on that,
before we get
into
to,
that,
yeah, why don't we let her finish and then we'll come back.
Come back. Okay.
Just as a final action, we are recommending amendments to this FSR, and these are an amendment to recommendation number 3. The amendments have been submitted to your city clerk. This is a request from transfer to reduce, from the fire department to reduce $1 million, by $1 million a transfer from salary sworn. And it's $1 million to transfer from salaries, overtime constant staffing to the overtime sworn account. So this is just overall, it has no net change to the attachment. It's just we're reducing the amount of money from one account within the fire department to another. And this was information that we were made aware of late upon our release of the FSR. And this $1 million transfer to overtime sworn is due to overtime expenditures tied to mutual aid efforts. And we expect that this money to be reimbursed. So it's a minor change there in attachment 7. There's also a recommendation to amend MICLA recommendations number 25 and 26B. This is just a technical correction. The amounts referenced in 25 and 26 need to match the amounts in the attachment. So we're just reconciling those numbers. And so we would ask to approve these amendments. before you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Englewood, I didn't want to cut you short if you had follow-up to what you had raised with ITA.
It was really, so as it relates to page 21 on the status of the departmental budget requests, the CAO's recommendation is that it's too soon and premature to look at reserve fund or UB transfers on those particular requests. But my question is, because it doesn't spell out exactly what they are in detail, public works for property maintenance, $62,000. There's some generic items. City controller for contractual services account for $22,380. Have these departments already been asked? Are these programs or services or staff that will be put off until the next FSR because if they couldn't find it within their department? Because you were, as it was stated, that they've been asked, and this is sort of our practice, particularly on that first FSR, that they've been asked to go back and see what they can do within their own budgets because it is early on and they have still money in their accounts, obviously. But are there particular accounts they can't touch? Are there programs they can't fulfill or services they can't do without these funds? Is there any one department that can't do one of these functions without the transfer, and if so, what? And if not, I'm fine with it, and we'll wait till the next FSR. But
So I think that is something that we are in conversations with city departments, whether or not they will be able to continue. Now, we believe that they should be able to continue, but it would be up to the department to advise whether or not they will not, and they'll have to report to us so we can report it in the second FSR. In the case of animal services, we believe that there are other issues that would probably be better addressed in a separate report to the council. So in that case, we would recommend that they report back on all the various issues.
then I would ask if those departments who CAO is suggesting should either absorb it within their current budget and or report at the next FSR, if between now and the time this comes to council, if they can let us know if there aren't programs that are needed, that they can't, and why they can't, it would be helpful to know that. That's usually a piece we just don't get into the weeds on, but I think it's important to know. Okay.
Just to make sure I'm clear, what would you ask that those departments provide?
A letter back to the council when this comes to council. If there is one of these programs that they've identified, and if there's a reason they can't absorb it between now and the next FSR, rather than just waiting to get to the next FSR and saying, well, these were restricted funds, or this is a special program. We've had to stop doing X, Y, and Z.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't make sense to wait months to get to that point.
It would be helpful for their cause to do so. Mr. Seha.
Sure. I was just, Ben Seha with the CAO. I was just going to add a part of the reason why we had the recommendation and we made the recommendation we did was because the amounts for each of these departments was nominal compared to their size of the budget. And also because, as reported by the controller in their preliminary financial status report, preliminary report, which tracks the amount, the reversion dollar amounts that each department in essence reverts back to the reserve fund at the end of the year. Each of those departments, for example, ITA reverted over $1 million in essence unspent funds back to the reserve fund. And for those reasons, it was recommended by our office for them to figure out how to manage savings that they're generating in other accounts to potentially offset what they were asking for.
Right. Okay. I just have one question, which will be repeated, I'm sure, when we bring up the departments. But from the CAO's perspective, I get the idea this early in the year of not doing, not considering these until we see where we're at and see what other kinds of savings they can realize in the departments. But the animal services request is different to me because the council grappled with this specific issue at great length, and we made a very specific direction to fund one specific program. This isn't another situation like where we've thrown $1 million into a bucket to be spent on a general program area. This was a specific EIR that we funded, and it's not clear to me why those funds would have been not only unspent, but unencumbered, such that they could be swept back to the general fund. Because, as I say, the council could not have been more explicit in funding this program. So from the CAO's perspective, how is it that those funds would be swept? And then I'm going to ask the same question of Animal Services and the other departments that are related to this issue as well. But from the perspective of the CAO, how did that happen in the first place?
From the perspective of the CAO, it's just based on the encumbrance policy that we have, whereby if funds are unspent, unencumbered, according to our encumbrance policy, they are swept and are reverted to the reserve fund. I mean, that's more of a technicality, I guess you could say. But if it's the priority of the council to reappropriate these funds, then that's within your authority to do so.
So just to be clear, so that I'm clear and that I understand the technical encumbrance policy, and also so that everybody who's interested in this issue understands, the council voted to spend this money on this specific feral cat EIR. We appropriated it in the budget. We instructed that it be spent on this program. And it hasn't fully been spent. There's $300,000+ that hasn't been spent. And for reasons that still aren't quite clear to me, despite our having cast that vote, those funds are not encumbered. Right?
There are now.
Why are they not encumbered if we instructed that that's how they be spent?
Well, typically encumbrances require a contract or some other specific service that that has been established for those funds to be spent through, whether it's personnel that a department hires, and so those funds would get encumbered against salaries or a contract. And in this case, to our knowledge, that wasn't the case by the time the year end came out last year.
Okay.
And it's also been our understanding that even if the department was to get these funds reappropriated back to them and then transferred to Bureau of Engineering, who's actually the lead on this work, that would still be short of what is actually needed for the EIR to be completed.
That's a second set of issues which we'll also grapple with. But this encumbrance part baffled me when I heard it, because it troubles me when the council votes on a specific issue that's very, highly fought over, and we make a decision and we say X number of dollars is to be spent on that program, and then it isn't spent, and then it gets swept. That's very, baffling how that can happen. But any other questions for the CAO before we bring up the departments? Mr. Blumenfield.
A couple different questions. One, just a clarification. You mentioned the linkage fee. What's the assumption in the linkage fee that's at issue here?
The budget assumed that the linkage fee would be in place this year. But
the linkage fee, where does that money go?
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO, the budget assumed about $10 million in linkage fee. That would be under departmental miscellaneous revenues, and then that would then fund an appropriation in the special fund.
Because it goes to the housing trust fund.
Correct. But first it would come into the general fund, and then it would fund the appropriation.
But we should point out that because there was this unknown with the linkage fee, there was a line item in the unappropriated balance called Unappropriated Balance Reserve for Mid-Year Adjustments, Contingent Revenues. And this line item was set aside in anticipation of these unknowns. So this $10 million technically will not be appropriated until that $10 million comes in. If the $10 million doesn't come in, that there's basically no cash behind this UB line item, and we reduced the appropriation, similar to the actions we took last year for similar unknown revenue.
So when you reduce the appropriation, though, that puts more money into the general fund?
It basically, you align, you will not have the expenditure because you don't have the revenue, so you're basically balanced. When you reduce the appropriation to the UB line item.
Right. But if we were to have passed the linkage fee and there, whatever money is, I just look at that as a wash. Like I don't see, I'm trying to understand why it affects the general fund at all.
Well, I mean, it's being counted in the general fund, so that's why it impacts it, but you're correct, it would be a wash. The only issue that we're raising is that because it is a UB line item, and oftentimes as we go through the, especially as we get to the mid-year and there might be other requests and other funding issues, that folks wouldn't look at that UB line item as a potential source to fund anything that is currently unfunded, because there wouldn't be any revenue backing that UB line item.
Just don't look at it because it's there, it's reserved to be this sort of revolving money for any money that comes into the trust fund.
Yeah, it's an appropriation that's contingent on the linkage fee being approved. If the linkage fee doesn't get approved, then that appropriation in the UB should in essence be voided, for lack of a better term, and not be looked at for any budget balancing purposes in the mid-year or for any programs or anything.
If it did get voided, then that would be $10 million more that we would have in the UB.
No.
The assumption is, as long as there's no revenue, that money, that appropriations is sort of set aside in the UB. So that money in the UB has no cash backing it. Once that cash comes in, that UB line item has cash backing it, and then you can make that appropriation.
It's more like a placeholder.
It's a placeholder, correct. And it's sort of different than what we have right now with the billboard revenue, which does not have a set aside. So there are some revenue components that do have a reserve set aside in the UB, and then there are revenue components that do not.
Regardless of what happens with the linkage fee, obviously I'm hoping we get it passed. It's not going to affect our budgeting. Unlike the billboard money, which even though it looks similar in the charts, if we don't pass something, then we are short that amount of money.
That is correct.
The assumed amount of money. Thank you for explaining that. And then also another confusing thing, the utility users tax, the 18.8 million you were talking about, it looks like it's called a shortfall, but we actually, which made me scratch my head because I would think that with all the increases, we would have a lot more money. And I guess it is more money, but it's just less money than we predicted. So we predicted a windfall than.
So our budget assumed about $407 million in electric utility users tax. The Department of Water and Power now estimates that revenue will be closer to $388 million. So that is, $382 million, which is a shortfall. So
You said we predicted how much?
we have about $407 million budgeted.
We got 388.
Yes.
So the shortfall is a shortfall of prediction, but it's actually, in reality, it's a major increase.
It was a major increase, but we've spent it essentially. So we assumed we'd get $407 million. We've appropriated that in the budget, and that money will not materialize. So that is a risk to the budget.
Is there any reason? I mean, that seems like I don't know. You tell me if maybe I'm wrong. Were we very far off from our predictions?
I would say we are pretty far off. The Department of Water and Power said we're about 6.5% lower than predicted energy sales, so that is impacting it. So the first thing that happened is the lower sales came in starting at the end of last year, May and June receipts. So at that point, Department of Water and Power already reduced their predicted EUT after we had already adopted the budget, after the city had adopted the budget. Subsequently, that growth that they're predicting is on that lower base as well. So it's kind of, we're just not getting that revenue that was predicted.
Okay, so I'm just, looking at it, I was trying to figure out if there's something we should be worried about here in terms of our prediction models, or is this it sounds like you're saying that they figured that out well in advance, it's just kind of didn't catch up with the budgeting process. It just seemed like a big number.
I would say this is not the first year that we have come short in electric utility tax. We usually use DWP's estimates for guidance because they have predictions for not only sales, but they also have the ability to change rates and all that. So we tend to use their numbers for the budget. But they have now started giving us revised estimates to include a lower, more conservative estimate, and they just started doing that this year, and we will be taking a greater look at those lower estimates.
Okay. Another sort of broad topic, the federal money. Basically, we've talked about how it could be substantial, but theoretically, it's because our budget year doesn't match up with their budget year. Is that quantified a little bit? I know there's the report, we've had a good report from you about all the monies that are at risk, and it's actually pretty frightening when you look at the monies, and especially if the proposed Trump budget were to be enacted, which, God help us, it won't be ultimately after the CR is done, but how much are we thinking is at risk in this fiscal year?
There are many unknowns on the federal budget status. We do have a section in this FSR on our page 57 where we discuss the federal and state budget. There are actions in the House that we're tracking, and then there's going to be actions in the Senate.
What's the top of the range?
So I don't know that we have an estimate at this time.
Is there order of magnitude? Are we talking $1 billion? Are we talking $100 million? Are we talking $300
Mr. Spindler, put your computer down.
At this point, we don't know. We definitely can report back, look into it a little bit more, and report back.
Okay, I'd like to see that. Thank you. And then the liability accounts, I don't know if it's possible. I mean, you talked about that as one of the elements of risk. To break down internal versus external liabilities, and I know that's not the way it's typically done, but the amount that's paid to third parties unconnected to the city, just in terms of our getting a handle on our liability issue, if there's a way to break that down.
I believe in, we may be due for another one of these reports, but I believe a couple years ago in 2015, towards the end of that calendar year, our office, in connection with the city attorney, issued a report that did categorize the types of liability payouts that we incurred over the last several years, and it did separate those liability payouts as dangerous conditions versus employment-related. That's a report that we could probably provide to this committee once more, and we'll work with the city attorney if that's what you would like.
I would love to see that, and especially to see it not in just this snapshot of time, but how that, especially if we did it a number of years ago, how that compares. Because it feels like, as we pay these things out through the budget committee, that the internal number is growing. But I'd be curious to know the facts behind it, if that ratio is changing, if it's been pretty solid, or what.
That's definitely something we'll work with the city attorney's office, get their guidance as to how best to provide that information to your committee.
Great. And then another thing.
And sorry, Mr. Bloomfield, on that point, the current information has already been broken down in great detail as part of the risk management working group's work. It can be diced and sliced however you'd like to see it. The historic trends that you're talking about is, to me, the critical point, and there will be a report forthcoming as well that deals with claim information, liability information, settlement, breaking it all down by, the means of how the money was paid out as well. So, and those trends over time. I'm hoping that will be a report that will be forthcoming soon. It's been requested for some time, so we'll continue to ensure that those who are involved in preparing it bring it to us with dispatch.
That'd be great, and hopefully if they're listening, they can also include this sort of aggregation question about the internal versus the external ratio, although that's probably, you do the work on those numbers, it's fairly difficult, but it's good to know. One other sort of general thing about the MOUs, we start seeing them early in the process, the smaller ones, and we see the little bit of the impact small, but that ends up being the baseline for the later MOUs. So I don't know if it's, as this process goes, if there's a way to have more of the cumulative impact of when we see some of them, to also know what that could mean if it's replicated down the road. And I'll just kind of put that out there as an open question. But when we see a small, when we see the early MOUs and different things and the impacts, we see them early on in the process and the impacts seem relatively small. But oftentimes they are setting the bar for a whole series of MOUs that we don't know about, and it kind of creeps up on us. And then by the end of the year, well, half the MOUs are following this course of action, and because of an action we took early on, we end up with this larger liability. And so it would be good to kind of bake that in somehow as we move forward, have a better sense of what the impact could mean of an MOU, an early MOU, if it's repeated down the line.
Well, I mean, I think we're still early in the process of those negotiations, and my recommendation would be if such information is provided, that it be done so in the Executive Employees Relations Committee, EERC, because it could potentially impact, the negotiations.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for that here. Okay. At this moment, I was just sort of putting it into it's one of those budget questions that does come up as we start to look at them. But I guess that's it for the CAO.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have anything else for ITA? Because Mr. Englander had asked some ITA questions and is satisfied now. Did anybody else have anything? All right. ITA, you are dismissed. Thank you, if you're still. Okay. Mr. Bonin, anything for the CAO?
No, Mr. Blumenfield did a great job asking all my questions.
Great. Mr. Englander, anything else for the CAO? Okay. Thank you very much. That's it for now. So let's go ahead and start with, let's bring up animal services and try to deal with this issue, because I think this covers several departments. And I think, members, correct me, but I think all of us wanted to know about the feral cat issue. Is there anything else for animal services? Okay, then let's also bring up, just on this issue.
Engineer and city attorney.
And BPW, was it?
City attorney. For this one?
Engineering and city attorney.
Yeah. So engineering and city attorney on this one. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah.
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 We have our BOE project director
Perfect.
for the EIR here.
Perfect. Good afternoon. You heard my question earlier. We thought that we had already dealt with this. We thought that we had funded this program fully, and we were not going to have to consider it again, but here it is. So why is it here again?
Well, we had the same confusion. Do you want to answer that from the CAO's office? I mean, why we still have the question?
Sure. I think Maria from our office mentioned our encumbrance policy, council members, and so for this fiscal year, the department asked for a reappropriation of the funds as they were reverted, and Maria did an excellent job of explaining why we didn't make that recommendation at this time.
Yeah, so the question is, though, why I guess that after it was appropriated and specifically budgeted, why it wasn't encumbered. And so part of this money has already been spent, I gather.
Correct.
And so there's a remainder left, there was a remainder left unspent. And I'm trying to understand how that was not encompassed within the contract for which the rest of the money was spent.
Right, yeah. We can't explain that part of it. What we can explain is what we've done. The project manager for the EIR from BOE, Dr. Jan Reebach, is here with us.
Okay.
She can tell you the steps that we have done. We do have a consultant. We've been working on this with the city attorney's office and BOE for a year or more, with regular meetings, and as far as the progress for where we are, Jan, if I could ask you to respond to that.
Sure. So today marks the end of the first phase of the environmental review process for the proposed citywide CAT program. We've completed our scoping process as of today. We've received over 500 public comments. We've held 3 public meetings, and we've hired an environmental consultant to prepare all of the scoping comments. So we are happy to move forward to the next phase if the required funding is made available.
Okay, but the funding was made available. We set aside $800,000 in the last budget. Where is that money? What's been spent, what remains to be spent, and why hasn't it been spent? I just want really the 30,000-foot level.
Yes.
Why hasn't this money already been spent, and why hasn't it been encumbered?
So, Councilmember, of the $800,000, $300,000 went to Bureau of Engineering, a special fund for them to get started on the EIR process. I think Jan can give an overview of how much has been spent of the $300,000. The additional $500,000 that went to Animal Services contractual services account. Some of it was reverted as part of a 5% citywide reduction exercise in FSR last fiscal year, and there was about $390,000 remaining. That $390,000 was not encumbered, as I don't believe that invoices were available to encumber the funding against, and that is what was reverted.
So we have an agreement with the consulting firm, and we began work in good faith. We just did not know that the money was not going to be available, that $800,000 was not going to be there when we needed to pay the bills. So we're sort of being told now that the project is very close, about $48,000 away from coming to a halt, which concerns me because it means that BOE is going to have to reassign staff, the consulting firm is going to have to take on other work while we wait for some kind of a process that I'm not clear on yet.
Just a math question, because you're asking, the $500,000 you said 5% was lowered, and now you're down to 390%?
That's correct.
390?
So
That's more than 20%.
I think it was a citywide 5% departmental exercise in one of the FSRs last year.
Right, but
So 5% of their budget.
What's that?
They had to reduce 5% of their budget, and part of the way they did it was by not spending this money.
By making a 20% cut in. So I'm just saying $500,000 going down to $390,000 is a lot more than 5%.
Yes, it was of the department's budget, I believe.
And so that was taken out of the encumbered money?
Well, the money wasn't encumbered at the time.
You know what? My head is kind of going to explode on this. We've already spent way too much time on trying to make clear the council's intent on this issue, I think. In the budget process, we spent way too much time debating this specific issue, and we specifically said, here's $800,000, go finish the job. I want this job finished, and I want this money to be spent right now, not a year from now. So what is it going to take to get that done? What do we need to do right now to ensure that the money that we budgeted long ago gets spent for the purpose that we instructed that it be spent? Is there a simple answer to that? Because if there's not, then I'm going to ask you all to we're going to go ahead and do whatever transfer is necessary today, or that's going to be my recommendation. And then I'm going to have you all come back at our next meeting to explain to us how we're going to do the mechanics of getting this done. Because this is enough discussion already.
Amen.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? Mr. Spindler, put your hand down. I told you at the outset of the beginning, you're not going to distract this meeting, you're going to leave.
I couldn't agree with that recommendation more. I mean, there are things in the annual budget process when we meet for the month of April where we're in agreement on something and there's no discussion. And then there's things where we spend a lot of time discussing something and there's not unanimity. This one, I think we all discussed this. I think we all expressed our frustration with having to do the damn EIR in the first place and wanting to pay for it and get it done.
Very much so.
I mean, we were, I think, unanimously clear. So I second exactly what you just said about both points.
Thank you. So let me ask the next question then. Assuming the entire amount that we already budgeted, is this job going to be finished?
I think that we're looking at some cost overruns, but we have put a proposal through that should be coming to the Paul Committee very soon to use the Animal Welfare Trust Fund, which is our charitable fund, in a different way, and we're planning to ask the Commission to cover any difference between the $800,000 and that from the Animal Welfare Trust Fund.
Okay, very good. Then I think rather than reverting from the reserve, what I'm going to recommend is that we restore 389,381, I think it is, whatever the number was, 389,381 to Animal Services for the Trap Neuter Return Program. But I'd ask that it be transferred from the UB reserve for mid-year adjustments rather than the general fund reserve, so that we don't have an adverse impact on the reserve fund. I'd like to have that happen. If there's no objection, we'll include that as an amendment to the FSR.
What the number is? How much? Wasn't it 500,000?
Well, there's some ambiguity about that too, because some of the folks who were writing were referring to $500,000. That was the number that I came in here thinking, but then I see in the FSR that there's a number 389, 381. So, any enlightenment on that? That's because of the reduction that you mentioned. Okay. So, but Ms. Barnett, I'm assuming from what you said before that with that reduction to the 389, you can cover the rest through the other means that you described.
No, what I said was I think there will be cost overruns over the $800,000 that we were planning to try to cover from the Animal Welfare Trust Fund.
Right. The 389 does not get us to the 800,000.
Right. No. We were expecting the 800.
Which sort of begs the question I was asking earlier. How did we, when you had to make a choice of reducing your 5%, how did that end up as a 20% cut, 21% cut to this line item?
Right. We weren't involved in the decision.
Because they took 5% of your entire budget, and the only place you could really apply that 5% was to this line item without cutting staff or other programs.
But I'm sorry, no, you can't do that.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what they did.
When the council makes a decision that X dollars are going to be spent on Y program, that must get done. It's not a discretionary act by a department head or anyone else to change that. That is an instruction from the council. We make the budgets, we make the policy, we make the law. I can't get my head around the idea that we can give a specific instruction and then have that just get changed after the fact. It doesn't work like that. So it can't happen.
It does.
It can't happen.
But in terms of this reversion, if we're saying it's 800,000, then we have to either provide the 500,000 or tell them how to get the remaining money that was cut from the 500 to make it the 21%.
Yeah, I thought it was 500 plus the 389.
Council members, if I may clarify, of the 800 that's being discussed, 300 is within Bureau of Engineering, and that money has been spent on this project, but there have been no reductions.
So from the 800, take 300 that went to BOE. Now you got 500 left.
Yes.
Right. That's the number that was cut because of their, savings requirements.
Well, no, they cut that number down to 289,000 or 389,000.
389.
And then in this FSR, 389,000 is being swept.
It was already swept. The request, it was swept at end of budget year. The request in the FSR is to restore it now from the reserve fund, right?
Yes, Councilman.
And my suggestion is don't take it from the reserve fund, take it from the reserve for mid-year adjustments so that we don't affect the reserve fund, but put the 389 back in so it can be spent.
So where does the remainder come from to get to 500, to get to the 800?
This is, I'm not going to do that one on the fly. That's for the department to figure out. That's for the mayor's office and others to figure out how they fill that gap. But, the CAO, everybody can figure that out. Well, we gave our instruction. That instruction got changed. I'm just trying to get back to where we were. So,
I guess, so part of our instruction is figure it out, get us back to the 800,000, take the remainder from wherever the animal trust fund, but 800,000 should come out of the budget somewhere.
Well, let's not say 8. 300's already gone. 300 is gone. 300 of the 8 is already gone. So they want their 389 back now, and then they would like the extra 120 back that got reduced. For now, we're going to do the my recommendation is do the 389, 381. They got to figure out the, other part. We weren't a part of that decision, so that's not our thing to fix right now.
So just to be clear for the advocates who came down here today, what we're saying is don't take the money away and do the damn EIR. Yeah?
Yes, in a nutshell, yeah. But the money was already taken away. So we're putting the money back with what we're doing today. So, okay. Anything else? Anything else for animal services? Mr. Blumenfield.
On the same point, I fully agree with what we're talking about, but I do want to ask the question, which is how much have we been spending because, since to spend unproductively because of this injunction, and basically how much more are we spending every year that this isn't done? Because this is one of those situations where the longer we dilly-dally, the more we are losing.
Yes, thank you for asking that. The numbers are very significant, and John has those, and while he's finding where he is in his notes, we've spent about $4.7 million since the injunction came into play on cat issues.
John Forlin with the Department of Animal Services. We have the data, not exactly what we want, but we have good data. In the years before the injunction was imposed in January 2010, of our intake of cats and dogs, about two-thirds were cats. About a third were cats and two-thirds were dogs. Since the injunction's been imposed, that's been reversed. We can exactly count the impact, and it's pretty significant.
So two-thirds of our impounds that used to be it used to be one-third impounds were cats. Now it's two-thirds because of the growing cat population, because we're not able to spay and neuter.
I guess my point is, this isn't just a question about the cat lives, which is very important, but it's also a dollars and cents question, and we're just throwing away money. Yes.
Yeah. I do. That's average is $670,000 a year that we can attribute to this, and that's going to continue until the EIR is done, until the court's acted, and until we can start this process up again. We've been very involved in spay and neuter of all cats for a long, long time, so this is a big change.
Yeah, and then we figured out that if we did 7,000 spay neuters a year, that instead of 670,000, the city would have a net income
of 328,000.
Right. So if we had actually done this already,
we'd be making money.
We'd be making money instead of having to come up with extra money.
Right.
And that's another just
shameful
thing that's happening.
For the 7 years, it would have been about $2.5 million that would.
It's $1 million swing. 670 in expense versus 320 in income.
Yeah.
$1 million swing, right? Am I?
That's right.
So in the amount of time that it's taken since we appropriated this money, we've already spent more by not doing this than we would have spent had we done it.
Well, we actually have been working pretty hard for the last, year and a half, 2 years, Jan, with weekly meetings and monthly team meetings and working with the consultants and with our subject matter expert. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's ongoing, and that's why we didn't want to see it stopped at this point.
Yeah, I mean, clearly. And this whole process is frustrating for you. It's been frustrating for us. It's understandable. It takes a lot of time because it's a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
It's a shocking amount of work given the policy, in my view. But
it is.
It is what it is. That's what CEQA gives us. So
it's very crazy making. And actually, I believe if you talk to BOE about the average cost of an EIR for the city, it's usually well over $2 million. So, but it seems like a lot for cats. I know.
I just have to chime in. I just don't get it because
I don't
all
either.
of the EIRs are done on physical buildings that have actual impacts. This has no impact. I mean, the impact, the non-alternative means having feral cats out there, causing diseased feral cats out there, having a greater impact. No matter how you look at it, more cats is going to have bigger and bigger impact on the environment. So all of the stuff that's costly for real EIRs on physical buildings doesn't exist for this. I don't understand how it costs so much, and I don't understand the cost overruns. I know maybe that's not the subject of the budget, but I would like to have some light shed on how the heck is this costing more when it should be this should be the cheapest EIR. Plus, we don't even need you to do a good job. Like, we just need to fulfill the legal requirement. I mean, we want you to do a great job, but you know, some EIRs have to deal with real impacts. This EIR is to get rid of a BS injunction, and we need to just fulfill the legal requirement and deal with it. We can get a C on this report. We just have to pass.
And as much as I would like to have that whole discussion over again, you're right. You were right when we talked about it during the budget hearings. And for now, I think everyone understands the sense of urgency that this committee feels in finally getting this behind us and moving on. So I've described the step we'll take. If there's no objection, we'll add that as an amendment, and I'll go through it when we're done again, Mr. Williams. Okay, anything else for animal services? Anything else for engineering?
Thank you.
Anything else for engineering? Okay, thank you very much. You're free to go. We will have more for the city attorney. Mr. Bonin, did you have other questions for BPW or Public Works?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring up Public Works next.
And if the Petroleum Administrator, Uduak, could come up as well.
I thought I had. Maybe I didn't. It's okay, I can take it. But at the end, no, okay. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And folks, if you can keep the sound down again, please take conversations outside because we have lousy acoustics in here. All right, good afternoon. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll go to Mr. Bonin for his question.
You guys can anticipate what I was going to say. We can save time. No, I called you up because I understand, well, I know very well that a number of us pushed very hard for the Petroleum Administrator to get hired. We have given him a tremendous workload, and my sense and understanding is we probably haven't given him the full set of resources and tools to carry out that workload, which is getting increasingly urgent and more gets added to his plate. I understand that there was a request for an environmental analyst, a staffer, to the tune of like $65,000, and we were hoping to hire this person in January, but you're not recommending the funding, and I feel this is pretty necessary to get going, so wanted to hear what's up.
Yeah, absolutely. Fernando Campos, Executive Officer. I'll start off by just setting the stage in terms of the fiscal impact, and then I'll turn it over to our Petroleum Administrator, Uduak Intuk, that will describe the roles and responsibilities of what this position is. You are 100% correct. The funding that is provided to us in this budget was about $326,000 for 6 individuals. One of those individuals is our full-time Petroleum Administrator. So where we find ourselves is that the position was only funded for 9 months for the Petroleum Administrator, so we had to absorb about 3 months funding for the position to make up the deficit, if you will, for those 3 months. In addition to that, this council, we were very thankful and appreciative of the additional positions that were added to the budget, but that only left about $198,000 to fund the additional 5 positions. The intent was to fill all these 5 positions at 6 months, so that would be starting around January 2018 forward. However, after we went back and did the math, we found that not only were we short 3 months for the Petroleum Administrator, but we were also short 2 months for the additional 5 positions. So what that basically left us with is that we can hold all hiring until about March or April of 2018, or we can start moving forward with some of the demands and some of the requests that are coming down the pipeline. So we made an internal decision to move forward with some of the positions. So I'm very thankful, and I'd like to announce that we did hire 2 individuals that just started this pay period. One person this pay period, one person the prior pay period. So Mr. Intuk finally has the staff after 1 year, and we wholeheartedly thank you for helping us get to this point. So in terms of what this environmental affairs officer will be doing, I'll turn that over to Mr. Intuk, but in general, basically this person would help us not only coordinate our civic engagement, our advocacy with neighborhood councils, also with community groups, but also help us achieve the Back to Basics mission that our mayor has done, and that is to increase civic engagement. So this person was going to be not only critical for advocacy, but also doing public outreach, community outreach, and most importantly, getting us to have that civic engagement and that communication with our general public. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Intuk to describe some of the roles and responsibilities of what this position would do.
Before you do, I appreciate the answer, but I'm not clear on when this position would be filled.
At this point, we do not have any funding for this position. So if you move forward as proposed, this person would not be hired, or this position would not be hired until July of 2018.
Okay, so I
therefore,
don't want to move forward as proposed. What's an alternative way of doing
Our request was to transfer some money, $65,000. I'll defer to the CAO's office in terms of where that money would come from, but that would allow us to move forward with hiring of this person. Our hiring process does take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks on average, sometimes a little longer. So just allowing us to move forward and then pinpointing it to a point where we can actually hire the person to align with the funding availability would be helpful.
Did you identify where the transfer of $65,000 could come from?
We have not. However, I'll defer to the CAO's office in terms of where that could come from.
Hi, I'm Raha Azameh from the office of the CAO. The only way that we could, the only place that we could transfer the funds from was either UB or it was the reserve funds, and under the umbrella policy that we had for this FSR, we are holding off on any transfer unless you want us to do so.
Mr. Harana, you got $65,000 in your couch cushions. Come on.
If that's your desire, I'll work with my boss to try and find you $65,000 at this point. But right now, the board is accurate. They are just barely making, staying within their budget, and they would need the money to actually be able to hire this person.
Okay. Udo, do you want to? Yeah.
Sure. It's quite a bit that this person would be helping out on. Most recent example is the Hyde Park natural gas explosion that happened in CD8. It's an ongoing investigation, working with the California Public Utility Commission out of Sacramento and Los Angeles. Has taken time away from other activities because we just don't have the capacity. And today's actually the first day we have both of the new staff members on board, but they have to be orientated and brought up to speed on what's happening. There's also been requests for a methane study. We're doing the refinery safety rules with hydrofluoric acid with Air Quality Management District. There's also fence line monitoring rules that are coming out, and without some assistance, Los Angeles will not have a voice in crafting those rules and to impact our residents.
Got it. It's public health and safety. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a recommendation that before this comes to council, we ask CAO to identify where we could find $65,000 so we could hire this position.
Mr. Illander, did you have any follow-up on that? Or
no, I mean, I think I've said enough on this, and I totally agree.
Okay. Mr. Bloomfield, any objection? No. We'll include that as an amendment then as well.
Great.
Thank you for your support. All right. Thank you.
Check those cushions, Dave.
Anything else for Public Works? Members? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we had completed public comment before, but I don't think I actually formally closed it. And in any event, as a courtesy, we have one more card from Reverend Oliver Bowie, who I'd like to ask to come up to speak. Reverend?
Good afternoon. And I'm Reverend Oliver E. Bowie from Holman United Methodist Church, and also a part of the organization STAND. And I just heard you making a recommendation to find the $65,000 to assist the oil administrator. I want to thank you for your leadership. I'm hoping that we'll move forward. It's been 30 years that not much movement has gone, and I want to champion you for moving in the right direction. And I think if we don't give this $65,000, that we will lose all the momentum that we have, and I think we need to continue to move forward. And thank you so much. You've got my support. If you need me, I'm there to support you on the $65,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, so that will close public comment on item number 6. And I think next, members will go we'll go with the City Attorney's Office. Who here is for the City Attorney? No? Okay, Department of Transportation? Let's go ahead and bring up the Department of Transportation then. Okay, City Attorney then. Sorry, DOT. Mr. Bonin, you had called City Attorney. Was that in the context of the Animal Services? Okay. So if I can just start with City Attorney, and I don't know if others have anything, but my only question, well, my two questions was on the workers' comp, but also on, well, I don't have a question on workers' comp. We'll just work on that. But on the liability claims account, the FSR indicates it's too early in the year to really predict where we're going to be with the liability claims account, and it certainly is too early in the year to predict with precision where we're going to be. But for a short time, it was our practice to have significant cases with ranges of estimates reported to this committee on a fairly regular basis. And it's been a while since I've seen one of those. So I think it would be helpful, given the fact that the liability claims account has become such a big concern of the committee, I think it's important that the client be able to anticipate a range of potential liability that we're looking at within the fiscal year and coming fiscal years as well. So certainly on the extraordinary cases, and to the extent that you can on ordinary, more routine litigation, that would be helpful to have. Second part of that is the point that Mr. Blumenfield and I were just discussing a moment ago, and that is, as part of our risk management work, we've developed, the City Attorney's Office has developed some great charts and breakdowns of the categories of liability for in this year and last year. Some time ago, I had introduced a motion, over a year ago actually, for a report that would show the trend lines in all of those areas, but also trend lines in claims and how those liabilities came about, whether through settlement or through judgment. And I think there were a few other factors that I'd asked it to be broken down. And we've never really had all of that wrapped into a single, we've had bits and pieces of it, and the risk management work has been a good comprehensive discussion going forward, but I'd like to get that all wrapped together in one place so that all the members in the committee could see it and see where our potential problem areas are and where we might need to budget differently in going forward years. Because as you'll recall, the last time we talked about this during budget and last year before that, the question is kind of where is the new normal and what portion of this significant under budgeting in liability is due to extraordinary cases that we couldn't anticipate, or is it due to the fact that we just have a different trend line now that we have to honestly budget for. So that's what we need to get a lot more precision on. I guess I don't really have a question after all of that, other than if any of you have anything to say in response to that.
Well, I think it is the appropriate time to do that. I think we have better data, as you know, and
Much
better
better
data management systems. So it is time, and we have been working with your office, you know, to put together that data with claims and litigation. Is it dispositive motion? Was it a judgment? That sort of information, but also identify like cases that we call anomalous, or do we need to change the line on that? So we will be putting that information together, and probably since we'll be discussing specific cases and litigation as well, maybe we'd do that in a closed session, but we definitely will be providing that information.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I had. Anything else for City Attorney? Okay. Thank you all. Let's bring up transportation next. Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, you had called transportation?
Yeah. One, I think we talked about this one before, but the reduction in parking fine revenue. There continues to be a decline, and we often tell communities that we're adding parking restrictions, preferential parking districts, time limits, overheight parking to address the different impacts that they face. But if we're not enforcing these restrictions, then we're not doing them the service that we said. So it always boggles my mind that we're declining and we're not hiring. You know, the parking enforcement is the perfect example of a job that pays for itself. So what's going on? Why is it declining? And is there a problem?
Angela Berman, LADOT. At the time that we prepared the first FSR, the revenue projections were down by about 4%. They're currently up to down 2% now. So we are gaining a little bit of momentum with that. But we have Chief Hale here who can talk about our hiring.
Yeah, good afternoon. Brian Hale. So that is correct. We recently have been able to transition a number of our part-time traffic officers to full-time status. About 29 of those traffic officers who were part-time are now going to be working full-time. That certainly will help us considerably with regard to the issue we talked about in terms of the issuance. That would leave us about 14 positions short still, but we do anticipate being able to continue to hire and backfill those vacancies. We had been experiencing some vacancies for a period of time because of the difficulty in terms of transitioning a number of folks throughout the department. Hiring was going on throughout the department, and so we are a priority in terms of backfilling, and so it's just been a bit of a challenge, but we are certainly turning the corner, I believe, and addressing that issue.
So next FSR, we're going to not be down in revenues. We're going to actually be up in our revenues, and we're going to have a fully staffed enforcement?
For the next FSR, we do expect to have a better projection for the revenue coming in. And as Chief Hale said, yes, we are hiring more, so hopefully that will just continue with that momentum.
Okay. Good to hear. It's going to be the perennial one we ask. Second issue not related to that. On page 53 of the FSR, we have $1.366 million from Prop A to LAPD for overtime and vehicle purchase for transit security services for Dash and for Metro. And so I wanted to understand what these expenditures are for and whether or not we're going to be reimbursed for the Metro expenses, because as I remember it, when we discussed the Metro contract, we were assured that Metro would be covering the full costs of our services. So I looked at that and said, why is that something? I understand the Dash. That makes sense. So of that 1.3, there's a portion of it that's Dash, and that's appropriate. But are we going to get that back? And are there other areas where the city's incurring unreimbursed costs that we should know about?
Okay, so on page 53, that bullet, there appears to be a typo. It should say for transit security services for dash lines and other LADOT vehicles and yards. This isn't for Metro, so that's just a typo that may have caused some confusion. Okay. But this $1.36 million, this is an appropriation from Prop A that we do receive full reimbursement from Metro for. So it's LAPD will be providing the security services on our dash lines, other lines, and kind of providing security at some of the bus yards.
Great. It's always a good answer when it's a typo. So. Thank you.
Well, not always.
No, that's true.
easily solvable.
Well, it's an easy, yeah.
Mr. Englander.
Yeah, I had a question along the same lines. I had a couple questions, but one was on those. We actually lowered the parking fine and adopted a lower budget from 152 to 140, correct?
Correct.
So now it's down again from our already lowered rate. while it's up from what the FSR might have suggested, it's down even further. So I'm trying to figure out, because we've had this discussion for a number of years now, where at one point, and we had part-time officers, there became an internal issue or conversation that I'd heard about, that the part-time officers were actually writing more citations than the full-time officers. And that became an internal issue and maybe even somewhat of a union issue that people were talking about. And so we started, for a lot of different reasons, phasing those out and hiring everybody full-time. And now the revenue keeps going down even further. And as one of the things that Councilmember Blumenfield had just stated, we have more restrictions going up in places that perhaps didn't even have any all these years. In fact, that's going to be my next question, because there's a budget item which is on another page, which is on page 53, in the last bullet, asking for $2.8 million in new appropriations for permit parking, PPDs, ongoing oversized vehicle posting, all those things. So we're asking for more money because there's a backlog there, and I want to get into that for a second. But we're enforcing less. And I'm not sure where that sweet spot is, and it sounds like we need a special study on that rather than just a conversation, because something's not lining up. Revenue keeps going down. We keep transferring to higher full-time, and we keep adding more enforcement opportunities because of traffic congestion and all the other issues we're dealing with, and yet we're not citing as many. So something's missing, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. So perhaps a special report, maybe looking at and comparing where we've been in the last several years to where we're at today in terms of staffing, both full-time and part-time, and also looking at as it compares to not just the number of citations, if you will, because we don't look at citations as a revenue stream necessarily, but an enforcement tool. So if we're doing less enforcement, that's an issue. And clearly we are, because I know I'm getting issues in my district, and I'm funding additional DOT with overtime out of my own office budget and different discretionary funds. So this is alarming. So I would ask if we could have a special report come back to this committee, and if the chair wants to entertain that, that'd be great. If not, I'm happy to bring in a separate motion, but it seems appropriate to this discussion in the line item.
I am happy to entertain that. I think it just, if you can define what you want the scope of it to be.
I think the scope should be going back 5 years and looking at, on a quarterly basis for 5 years, the number of both full-time compared to the number of part-time, and to delineate how many citations have been written out of each category quarterly for the last 5 years, both part-time and full-time. And I know that we have the data because it was always reported. In fact, that was the argument that was always being made. I know this would be impossible, so we'll just have to know this eyes wide open going in, and I wouldn't ask you to report back on this because it's not worth, I don't think, the time and effort and energy. I know that over the last 5 years, we've added a lot to both preferential parking programs, districts, as well as signage and restricted parking. There's no way, well, there is a way, but it's not worth the time or effort or money to capture. We'll just know that there's been a lot in the last 5 years that have added. We've added throughout the city of Los Angeles. So therefore, we know that there are more scofflaws and opportunities for enforcement. So that hasn't gone down. It's actually only gone up. So if we just keep it really simple and start looking at the data and figure out what we're doing, I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. I think one of the things that is a factor, in addition to the staffing, as far as the issuance, the inability to have staff to write the citation, of course, is one thing. But the other dynamic that's taken place is the number of special events that are occurring throughout the city, unanticipated events, emergencies, responses. As the economy has improved, certainly there's more events taking place in our iconic facilities, and these events are typically reimbursed on an overtime basis because they have increased significantly, and we have an obligation to, of course, provide the officers to the sponsor to help maintain safety. We're backfilling oftentimes with able-bodied officers who are otherwise assigned to the area offices for enforcement purposes. And so that is a dynamic. Just for the last 2 years, for instance, we've had, last year there were about a little 5,200 special events throughout the city, which represented about a 40% increase from 2015.
Maybe this, if you could add that to the report, that would be really helpful to know if, in fact, maybe it's something we have to look at, if traffic control for special events is taking the primary function of traffic enforcement throughout the city because these events are going up, and while those are being reimbursed hopefully at full cost recovery and are being done on overtime, but then we don't have enough staffing to fulfill the base obligation of enforcement, then there's an issue. And maybe there's an opportunity where that obstacle exists to look at a different staffing model for special events. This became an issue many years ago with filming in Los Angeles, and it wasn't working anymore. And when we were hiring, they were hiring officers on overtime. Now they hire retired officers, and there's other opportunities. And so maybe we have to come up with another model if we have so many special events that are dominating, not only dominating and taking away from the core service and function of the Department of Enforcement, it's also now costing the city in revenue. It's a double-edged sword. So we're getting reimbursed for the time they're spending at the special events. We're losing money on the back end, and we have vehicles that are either taking up the right-of-way or breaking the law that we can't then provide the service to make sure we're clearing up those issues. We all know how long it takes, and the lag time in, for example, 72 hours and 72-hour citations and impounds are getting a lot longer. And we know why. I think we need to fix it. So it's gotten to a point where maybe that I'll request that should be part of the report when that comes back, if you could. Is what have we seen in change of the special events in the last 5 years as well? And I know those are tracked, and we have to look at maybe redrafting function and coming up with another option. And I think there's a great opportunity.
Well, there is an opportunity. I mean, we moved in the direction of, or we tried to move over the last few years in the direction of full-time employment for a lot of these officers, in part with the idea of creating greater flexibility in deployment so that they could be used in traffic control when that was necessary, and when that was less necessary, they would be diverted into enforcement and doing parking enforcement. And with the special events being reimbursed at an overtime rate, maybe hiring up more in order to accommodate the special events will create an even greater flexibility, which is in part reimbursed by outside parties that we can then also use for enforcement as well.
Which is exactly what we're sort of doing with Metro and LAPD. I mean, so those are the opportunities I think we've got to look for, but we should have that discussion now.
And Chief, as part of the report back, I know you touched upon some of the challenges of hiring up. If you can delineate, specifically what the barriers are, we don't need to get all into it now, but as you report that back, because maybe there are some roadblocks that we need to help clear up to get that done as well. So, all right.
So then my next question was actually on that, is there's an ask for about $2.8 million in new appropriations for permit parking program to support the anticipated expenditures and ongoing maintenance of the new PPDs and sign postings. what's that money for? Is it for staff? Is it for enforcement? Is it for signs? And what's the backlog for those two programs?
So the permit parking program, which includes the preferential parking districts and the oversized vehicle signposting work, is funded through the parking permit program revenue fund. We do receive a general fund appropriation for the salaries for all of our employees that work in this program, but the expenses for this program need to come. We need to establish these appropriations every fiscal year at the beginning of the year. So this money is just for the materials, the signs, supplies.
And what's the current backlog? What's the time frame?
You know, I don't have the current backlog for that program, but I can make sure we get that to you.
I've been told that it's about 9 months.
Yeah, that sounds about
I can
right.
tell you, I met with some folks this morning from my district who were, and we met with Kevin, and he's great, and saying that one of the reasons that this particular one took over a year and a half and still isn't quite done, and part of the reason things have been moving slowly, and it's not just them, because it's the people getting the petitions back and forth, but there's only 3 people who actually do the PPD evaluations, right?
We have more than 3 people. I'm not sure what he was referring to. It might be someone that's doing a certain type of work.
Ida Rubio with the Office of the CAO. The backlog, I believe, is about 6 to 9 months in this program, and I believe you're referring to maybe the people that go out in the field that actually have to go and validate the information.
Maybe so.
So my understanding is that in addition to the PPD backlog, they're also getting in a lot of requests for the oversized vehicle signposting, and they're trying to balance the workload between the two different types of services.
So my understanding, too, is that we only have one person that actually goes out and validates the sign postings and where they go out. That's what I was told. It may be one for the valley.
Perhaps.
I think it was one for the entire valley.
I can check that for you. If you're interested.
And so this backlog is significant and should be part of this FSR and trying to figure out how to reduce it and eliminate it. And I'm not sure why it hasn't been brought up. So we're asking for more money for more signs and for the vendors, but we don't have anybody to actually put them up, and we already have a 9-month backlog. So why do you need the money?
As part of the recent report regarding street reconstruction and Vision Zero funding that was approved by City Council, you had proposed a question about providing more funding for traffic paint and sign posters.
Right.
And so when we drill down to the root of that issue, it stems from this, from the...
Right, no, I know.
Right.
But what happens...
So we will be addressing that issue through a separate report back.
We've been working...
Because my understanding, too, is that with all these requests coming in for these very specific, for PPDs and oversize, through Vision Zero, if they identify on the high injury network new signage, or if it's re-engineered, and or there's been a speed survey done and they have to repost, all of those take precedent over anything else for signage, as it should, right? I mean, there's no question. Those things should come first. But the things that were pending get put on the back of the stack. I would think it sounds to me, and I understand why, we're just grossly underfunded in, and maybe there's an opportunity, and I brought this up in personnel as well, and I guess that's the report you're talking about coming back with how we can streamline the process, even just to catch up, even if it's temporarily, or working with the vendors for that purpose. So if that's the report that you're referring to, then that'd be great. I'd look forward to. Okay. Do we know when that report will be finalized?
I'm not sure what the timeline was that you gave us. It might have been...
It was pretty quick.
45 days? Yeah.
I think
There's also a report coming to T Committee on
that
APD process as well.
And backlog. And,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay. Excellent. Well, I look forward to, and how long do you think it would take to put the 5-year report together on the enforcement and special events?
That data is readily available. I think within 60 days we definitely would have something. If you need something sooner, I could check with our vendor, Conduit, as well as our special events unit. So
Can you do it in maybe 30 days? And if it's not ready, let us know.
Sure.
Okay. We want to help.
We'll strive for 30 days.
We want to help. Yeah, this is a big issue. Okay. Terrific. I really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anything else for transportation? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let's go ahead and bring up sanitation next. Mr. Blumenfield. Mr. Blumenfield, fire away.
Okay, my question concerns the what appears to be a large vacancy rate, 14% vacancy rate. Wanted to know, where are these vacancies? Are they highly skilled or less skilled positions? While I know that the current employees, we like getting overtime, we should also be committed to not overworking our employees and creating good paying jobs. So please shed some light on the vacancy issue.
The vacancy rate was mostly due to the new positions that sanitation received for 17-18. I believe we had received a little under 100 positions, and right now we are actually in the process of hiring more employees like engineers, RCTOs, and all the other positions that are available.
So it's on that end. It's not sanitation drivers and sort of the less skilled positions. Is that correct?
It's a mix.
Okay. And so you feel like we're on track?
Yes, we are.
Okay. All I want. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and bring up, thank you. We'll bring up building and safety next.
Should I start again with this? Same question, basically. You guys have a 13% vacancy rate, but also an $8.35 million surplus. So I wanted to know where the vacancies and the surplus, and if they are in case processing, should the city be hiring additional staff so that the projects can be expedited and we can be more customer friendly? Regarding code enforcement, we get a lot of complaints, or we all get complaints about not responding fast enough. And when we don't address violations, we end up with blight and all of those good reasons. So back to the question, it really comes down to the vacancies and the surplus.
Zachary Course, Building and Safety. I'd have to look at the exact figures for the vacancy rate, but typically in the past it's been inspectors. The revenue that you cited was for enterprise fund revenue. So I think I don't think the engineer vacancy rate is very high, but I'd have to check the details. But typically it's inspectors that we were in hiring recently.
Okay, so the overall rate, according to the report, was 13%.
Correct.
You're saying that's mostly where in?
Typically it's inspector class, but I'd have to look at the exact figures to find exactly which classes.
Okay, but we also have a surplus.
In the enterprise fund revenue, correct.
And you can't use that revenue to get more inspectors?
Well, I think it's more about the hiring process and attrition rates. So we are actively hiring, and I believe building mechanical inspector is an exam that came out fairly recently. So we are actively trying to hire, but it's attrition rate combined with trying to fill the new hires. It's, I don't know what else to say without getting actually data to share with you.
Okay, well, does it seem like a high vacancy rate to you?
Do you want to comment on that? It's actually gone down because we've been doing a lot of hiring. We got, I believe, 250 positions over 3 or 4 years, and so we've been trying to hire a lot of people over the last few years. And so, again, I'd have to look, but just off my memory, I know it's inspectors is typically is the one that we've been hiring more and more recently.
Okay, I certainly want to see that those inspectors get hired and us be able to avoid the complaints that we're getting and be able to get our codes up to snuff. So,
well, I know our code enforcement inspectors, our revenue for code enforcement was $2 million as of the end of September, which was 29% for the whole overall year. So we're actually ahead a little bit on the general fund revenue, specifically for the code enforcement like violations.
we're ahead on revenue but behind on the inspectors?
Like I said, I have to look into the exact specific classes, but the revenue that you cited that was over is enterprise fund revenue.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and bring up aging next. Bloomfield, you're on a roll.
All right. So similar questions. In that the FSR projects a $700,000 surplus, which compared to some other agencies isn't a lot, but for you it's 10% of your budget. And obviously we're appropriating the money for sensitive populations and wanted to understand why there's a surplus and if there's something that we need to do as a council to help you fulfill that.
James Don, Assistant General Manager, Department of Aging. With me is Dale Osborne, our Administrative Director. I just wanted to begin to say we don't know exactly where the number in this report comes from, the $700,000 surplus. In our FSR to the CEO, our projection was $167,000. So it'll be a little difficult for me to cover that figure. But in terms of our vacancy rate, we have been in the process of filling our vacancies. We just recently filled 4 positions. We have 4 more positions that we're waiting for the personnel department to issue the exam for social worker. Primarily, our vacancies are under grant-filled positions. So the funds are either going to be utilized with some of our as-needed staff for special short-term projects. Any salary savings that we accumulate under the grant funds will be returned to us the following year as one-time only funds. So we will still have an opportunity to utilize those funds for services for seniors and family caregivers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. I don't know if the CAO wants to shed light on where the 533,000 difference is. If not now, that's fine. Unless you.
Yeah, we'll discuss it with the CEO. If there's $500,000 sitting somewhere we could use, I'll be happy to take it.
Councilmember Terry Sauer with the CAO's office. Typically, when you have a discrepancy or a difference in surplus, it usually has to do with how the hiring projections are done. We would have to go back and look at specifically what our underlying assumptions were for when the department would do its hiring versus what the department reported in the FSR. We certainly can have a report back, and we will have our staff work with the department.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We finished with ITA already, so let's go ahead and bring up Mr. Englander, fire or LAPD? Your preference.
LAPD is fine.
All right. LAPD, please.
Quick question.
Mr. Englander, go right ahead.
Yeah, it was on PD, on the money that is going into the HOPE teams. Just looking for it here.
Everybody okay back there?
The money that is going into the HOPE teams, do we know where that's scheduled to go?
I could get that information for you. I don't have it right off, but the funding was split between the HOPE and the Summer Night Lights, and I know it's going to operations, but I don't know how it was split by bureaus, but we can get that to you.
Is there anybody from LAPD that would know here?
Not here. We can, like I said, I will gladly get that for you. I just don't have that with me.
All right. Well, I don't understand why it's one of the major asks that's in the FSR. Why it's not? Why do we don't have that information? Like, okay, there's a, and I'm trying to find where it was. How much is it?
It's the $1.6 million that's being reappropriated. It was approved.
We got $1.6 million that's being asked for, and something we desperately need, and we don't know where it's going.
Well, it's grant funding that we received in June. It was approved by the council in June, and we're asking to have it reappropriated because when we received it. But like I said, I don't have the split of how it's, of exactly how it's being divided up.
All right. Well, I'd like to hold that back until we do.
Okay.
That's really important. It's probably one of the most important functions we're actually doing right now. And I made a point of it last time as well when we talked about it in budget. So, okay, then I'll make a request that we hold that back until we get the information.
Anything else for PD members? Okay. Fire department?
And for PD, I see that there was I think there's a helicopter pilot here that was ready to answer questions on the MICLA financing for helicopters, but I didn't have any questions on that, so fly safe. Fire department was from Paul Koretz. And he asked about the sworn overtime overrun. I think his question was in Section 1 of the FSR deals with the status of the departmental budgets. Regarding the fire department, it recommends a $7.4 million internal transfer, $2 million of which would cover the projected shortfall in sworn overtime. Earlier in the same action, it states that the overtime constant staffing fund will be able to cover all sworn overtime costs. Can somebody clarify why we continue to see projected shortfalls in sworn overtime if the department appropriately has funds available that would be specifically budgeted to cover overtime? Shortfalls for overtime in both fire and PD have long since become a concern of mine. It's just to understand how this is being handled. That's from Paul Koretz.
Good afternoon, Emilio Rodriguez, Fire Department. Simplest explanation for the overrun in the sworn overtime account is the excessive deployments, strike team deployments we've had for the various wildfire events throughout the state and throughout the nation, for that matter. We typically budget in that account for $6 million. With La Tuna Fire alone, we had a $2.7 million payroll disbursement in one pay period. So just putting all that into context, we had an overall cost overrun anticipated through year-end, or at least through mid-year, of $5 million. We addressed that through a $4 million motion over the past couple of weeks, shepherded by you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the balance is essentially being made whole through the transaction before you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else for fire members? No. All right. Thanks very much. Let's bring up personnel next.
This too was from Councilmember Koretz. He wanted to ask about the $800,000 shortfall over the fiscal year, and can the department explain how the shortfall developed and what the departmental functions could suffer if it's not completely backfilled?
Good afternoon. Did you catch that? Did y'all catch that? Or
you have an $800,000 shortfall projected.
Why and what impact?
Why? Yeah, what are the impacts? That's it. From Mr. Koretz.
I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time?
Sure.
Yeah, Mr. Koretz asked, he said you have an $800,000 projected deficit.
Oh, okay.
Why and what are the impacts from it going to be?
I believe that they have a projected deficit in the salaries that's needed account. I think most of those are being attributed to increased background investigator, civil service testing, and also custody care services. And so in terms of, I think Aram can speak more as to what might be the impact on services.
Good afternoon. Aram Kyumjam from Personnel Department. There has been a great deal of increased hiring both for LAPD as well as for the fire department. And some of the background investigators we use to process those candidates are part of the as-needed salary. So we've increased our LAPD hiring over last year by 13%, and we are on track to break that number again. And then we were also notified earlier this year by the fire department that they received the SAFER grant and would be adding an entire academy class. So we've had to devote additional resources to those efforts. Traditionally, our as-needed salaries have always been underfunded, but we've been able to use salary savings to transfer monies into that account. However, the cuts to our salary savings, to our salary budget item this year have prevented us from balancing the as-needed fund, and also we've taken a hit to our salary because of the increases to workers' compensation analysts. So that salary increase has hit our department disproportionately. We've also had to increase certain as-needed funding because we're utilizing weekend testing for some of the police hiring process. We've had tremendous success with processing candidates on Saturdays and Sundays, particularly with our expo, and we'd like to go in that direction more. However, those funds come out of our as-needed budget as well.
Just one follow-up on that. Can you ballpark what percentage of the background check expenses are related to police and fire as opposed to everyone else in the city?
I can only talk about the peace officers because I do public safety hiring. We do have some civilians dedicated to backgrounding civilian employees, but they come out of a different budget. So
actually, that answers my question. Because I had understood that they were competing with one another, but if they're separately budgeted,
we do backgrounds on certain safety positions that are not fire or police. So, for instance, street services investigator or park ranger, those fall under the public safety ambit. But I would say we also do LAWA and port, but I would say about 90% is PD and fire.
And does that include the civilian employees as well, or only sworn?
Just the sworn.
Okay. So I guess maybe this is a question not then for you, but within the non-sworn background checks, how much of that is being spent on LAPD and fire compared to other departments? Does anybody have that?
I would have to get back to you with that information.
The reason that I ask is because some departments who've been somewhat slow in hiring up attribute, delays in background checks, and that's usually because it's assumed that a disproportionate amount of effort is being done for police and fire, understandably so. But I just want to make sure if we're falling short for the other departments, that we look at adequately funding enough positions to be able to hire those positions up. I'm thinking street services in particular, and there are others as well who've used the same kind of argument.
I believe that LAPD has some in-house personnel that do some of their civilian backgrounds as well. And for non-sworn positions, we do have the ability to use a contractor, which we occasionally do, but only for non-sworn.
Okay, very good. Anything else for personnel members? Okay, thank you all very much. Last but not least, that brings up city planning. Now batting for Mr. Kretz.
Now batting, yes.
Englander.
All right, see if we can hit another home run here. So on city planning, Mr. Kretz wanted to know about the update of the Ridgeline Ordinance, and since it's not in the FSR, he'd asked about how much it would cost. He thinks it's about $125,000 to do the environmental clearance, and asked planning to provide a description of the project and what the initial funding would be toward this to get it done.
Good afternoon, Jason Klein, Department of City Planning. The Ridgeline Ordinance is not a funded work program within the department's budget. The councilman had submitted a motion requesting the CO and the CLA to identify funding. The funds would be utilized for contractual services to hire an environmental consultant to prepare a land use ordinance along the Ridgeline. Our department has indicated that workload could be basically followed through on through the updated community planning program. We just launched the Southwest Valley program. We do understand that it would take 3 years for those community plans to be adopted, but that workload could be absorbed through a funded budgeted program as opposed to doing a standalone project and doing an environmental study directly for that project.
Got it. And did you address that in writing back to Mr. Koretz?
We did indicate that in our response to the CAO's office on that question, so we can make sure that we do forward
So
it.
probably went to the CAO's office, but not to the council office.
We have had the discussion, and it's a priority for the council member in his office.
Sure.
However, their funding has not been identified for that, and we've explained that without additional funding, we would not be able to fund that program through our current year budget.
Is his motion currently pending in Plum?
I believe it was for budget and finance.
So it sounds like we should refer it to Plum, I would suggest, so to make sure that that it's not a funding issue, but that the department is instructed by Plum then to wrap it into the community plan, which would make more sense. And if that's an instruction out of Plum and then to council, it doesn't get lost and then it's done. If in fact, though, he wants it done sooner and separate, certainly I'm sure that working with either the CLA, CAO, or discretionary funds could identify an independent consultant to do the Ridgeline study if that were his desire. I can't speak for him, but at least this will move it out of this committee and put it on a track. Maybe I can suggest that.
Yeah, rather than guessing what a course of action that he might suggest would be, I don't know that it's necessary to take an action with regard within the FSR.
Anyway, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we have the answer back, and if you could continue to work with CD5 to work out the best path forward, I think.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Anything else for planning? Very good. All right. Then, members, if there's nothing else on the FSR, I would recommend approval of the CAO's recommendations as amended by the items that are contained in the written technical amendments that are before you. And I guess not quite technical amendments, but the amendments that are before you, 1 through 5, which I'll ask Mr. Williams to read into the record in a moment. But in addition to that, the other amendment would be the restoration of the appropriation to animal services of the $389,000 that we discussed. I think you got that. That would be coming from the UB reserve for mid-year adjustments.
And I had one more.
And then Mr. Englander, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll submit it in writing, but it's to authorize the city engineer to immediately negotiate and execute a qualified on-call consultant agreement between the Bureau of Engineers Environmental Documentation Consultant Services, a list for an amount of up to $100,000 for specialized environmental consulting services to review and provide comments on comments on the draft program environmental impact report on the Santa Susana Field Laboratory and instruct the city administrative officer to identify a source of funds within 30 days for this purpose, and then direct the city engineer to issue an NOP on the selected PQOC environmental documentation consultant prior to the appropriation of $100,000 in the new Santa Susana draft program EIR account within the engineering special service fund, so the consultant can immediately begin their review of the draft program EIR and authorize the CAO to make technical corrections necessary for these recommendations to implement the council's intention.
All right, and the appropriation, at the $100,000 appropriation, once the source of funds would be identified, that report would come back here for us to actually approve the appropriation.
Yes.
Okay, so if you could make sure Mr. Williams has that. And anything else, members? Anything else to add? All right, Mr. Williams, can I leave to you the task of reading amendments 1 through 5 and item number 6 for the public, because we all have it, but
sure.
Thank you.
This is an amendment from the Chief Legislative Analyst for the first financial status report. Item 1 is to transfer or appropriate $80,000 within the General Services Purpose Fund number 100-56 from the Special Events Fee Subsidy Citywide line item to the Heritage Month Celebration and Special Events line item to fund previously approved council actions under Council File 13-0757-S5. Item number 2 on the CLA's amendments is to transfer and appropriate $50,000 from the Council Fund number 100-28, Council General Fund account number 11010 to a new line item in the General City Purposes Fund number 100-56, entitled National League of Cities 2018 Summit in Los Angeles, to support the city's hosting of this national convention. Item number 3, transfer, appropriate $90,000 from the AB 1290 Fund number 53P, account number 281213, Council District 13 Redevelopment Project Services, to the Project Restore Trust Fund number 869-40, account number 0392, to support restoration efforts of Project Restore. Item number 4, transfer/appropriate $32,863 from the Capital Improvement Expenditure Program, City Facilities Maintenance Account, to reimburse the General Services Department for routine office maintenance and repairs as follows: $19,718 to General Services Department Fund number 100-40, account number 1014, salaries construction; $13,145 to General Services Department Fund number 100-40, account number 3180, construction division, materials and supplies. Item number 5, transfer/appropriate $500,000 from AB 1290 Fund number 53P, account number 281209, Council District 9 Redevelopment Projects Services, to Council Fund 100-28, account number 1070, salaries as needed to support operational expenditures.
All right. So with those amendments, members, if there's no objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve the CAO's recommendations relative to the first financial status report for fiscal year 17-18. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is a motion, Weezer O'Farrell, relative to a request to the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance amending section 21.41 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to include a new subsection for a tax rate applicable to businesses that provide digital goods.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Robert Lee. The premise of this is we are proposing, the Office of Finance is stating that our existing ordinance in its current nature, it no longer addresses such thing as online streaming and retails. And as such, it falls under the 2149, which is the highest rate. The focus being the fact that it is tangible versus intangible. If you were to sell a CD, it'd be retail, it'd be a certain rate. However, if now, as technology becomes more prevalent, it's a downline, a streaming, it should be more or less on the resale side. So the Office of Finance is recommending that, of course, with City Attorney and CAO, that we review it and propose to go forward with a modified ordinance adding 2141H regarding digital goods to the ordinance.
Okay. So using the CD as an example, when someone purchases it at Target, they're not paying so much for the piece of plastic as the music on it.
Yes.
But if they get that same music from an online source, the business that's providing that pays many multiples of the gross receipts tax.
Correct.
Compared to what Target has paid.
Due to the nature that there's a definition of tangibility versus intangibility, unfortunately, if it is retail and it is a CD or it's wholesale disc, multiple discs, it's a lower rate. The 2149 is sort of drop everything else that doesn't pertain to it, and because it is not defined as tangible, it falls under the highest rate and is at a higher level.
Yeah. Because if it's intangible under our current tax law, it's considered a service rather than a retail sale of a good. Okay. And in either event, sales tax is currently collected on that sale?
Yes, it would still be counted.
Okay. All right. Questions, members? We have a couple of speakers, but go ahead, Mr. Bloomfield.
What will be the financial impact if this played out on the city?
At this rate, we would model it similar to what we did with 21C and D regarding the internet that we have. It would go through a protocol of any individual or entity that would want to register for this format, for them to complete a questionnaire. We would review what they state on it and see whether or not they do qualify for something like this, and exactly what percentage of their activities qualify, because it might not all be there. For example, they still might sell CDs, wholesale, retail. So streaming might be a certain portion of their business, so we would only address that portion within this classification.
So, okay, go ahead.
But overall, in terms of, is there any estimate on what this would, how it would result city finances?
At this point, the rate would be going from the highest rate, which is the 4.25, to the rate that is under 2041, which is the $1 one. However, it would be based on, because this is a new subset that's coming out, we still have to do some analysis. We know that there are certain entities that have gone through the audit process that this has come up, and we're finding that it does not pass the 2149 test. It's at a higher rate, but we would have to...
Is the 2149 the smell test? What is that?
Oh, more or less. For example, one of the processes is to go through an administrative remedy process. So when an entity does not agree totally of how we reviewed it, and the classification should be under retail as to professional services, they can go through the administrative remedy process and they can review it. At this point, the few entities that have gone through the process, the Board of Review has not sided with Office of Finance on the fact that it should be going under the 2149, and that they're recommending that it goes to 2141.
You mean that it goes to retail? Or
it goes to the internet.
What?
That it goes to the higher rate, not the
It goes to, at this point, we, Office of Finance, due to the tangibility issue, sees it as should be going under the 2149 because we have no mechanism otherwise. They, the BOR has affirmed otherwise.
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. With regards to your question about the impact, that would have to be determined. So we'd have to identify the business types using probably the NAICS codes that might qualify for this kind of classification, and then kind of do an estimate about what they would be paying under the higher rate versus under the lower rate. And if I understand what Robert Lee was talking about, Finance is proposing the solution because right now it's applying a higher tax rate, and then when it goes to before the administrative hearing, they want to apply the lower rate.
Right.
This would give them the mechanism to apply the lower, Finance to apply the lower rate.
Right. So the impact theoretically would be less money for the city in terms
Correct.
of general revenue.
Correct.
But perhaps we're also capturing money that we wouldn't capture otherwise, or no.
This would be a reduction.
It's clearly a reduction, question of scale.
Right, right.
And honestly, it's also a question and precision, because Finance makes its decision based on what's in front of it, but if a reviewing board is reversing that, that's going to be the outcome, and it's going to be a reduction in what we'd already budgeted and anticipated, but Finance can't do anything about that because they don't have the tools. And the amount will also depend on how you define a digital good, too, because whether it's a specific purchase or, for example, a monthly, all-you-can-eat kind of service or something like that, there may be definitional differences that will have to be taken into account, even on dealing with the equity issue that you're describing. Mr. Englander?
I like that, digital all-you-can-eat.
Yeah.
All right.
All you can consume.
Yes, I got it. That's interesting. It sounds to me like it's really a matter of the fact that these definitions were probably written a long time ago and they're antiquated and they didn't follow what's really happening in the space.
I would like to add as well that this was meant to apply to a certain type of business,
Sure,
and these
right.
other businesses were purposefully excluded. If you actually look
Right,
at
right.
the ordinance for the internet-based business, it talks about other business types that are excluded. So this would be broadening
So it's
that
sort of like if
definition.
we're trying to shoehorn in and err on the side of caution as it relates to perhaps city revenue rather than what fits the space and what's more appropriate, perhaps, to look at what are best practices. And on the flip side of it, it's not, from my perspective, it's not a matter of if we, it should be equal to that of what is considered in that marketplace. So if the marketplace actually considers that retail, then we should consider that, because we're only competing against ourselves if we don't, because those businesses will say, okay, then quite frankly, we'll go somewhere else. And it's even easier for them to go somewhere else than brick and mortar, if you will. So I would strongly recommend we move forward in looking at how to update these definitions to give the department the ability to make sure they fit the space more appropriately to where we're at technologically today, and so we're competitive and business friendly as well.
Okay. Mr. Bonin, anything on this?
Helps with Amazon, apparently.
No, I don't think it's related.
It might, actually. They have streaming and stuff.
Well, but the headquarters here will be fulfillment, right, and headquarters. Yeah, maybe.
All right. Let's go ahead and invite up our speakers. We'll start with Joel Flato, followed by Sarah Walsh. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members for the opportunity to speak, and also thank you, Councilmember Weezar, for introducing this motion. My name is Joel Flato, and I'm Chief of West Coast Operations and Artist and Industry Relations for the Recording Industry Association of America. Los Angeles, as an entertainment capital of the world, has long been a dynamic center for the music business, one of California's most iconic and impactful. This has only deepened and increased in recent years, with LA now the home base of the worldwide music industry. Music, along with the entertainment, media, and technology sectors, are vitally important to LA's economy, visibility, and standing on a global stage. Two of RIA's and the world's most prominent music companies, Universal Music Group, with important entities already located in Los Angeles, and Warner Music Group, soon locating to Los Angeles, make investments that drive downstream industries and contribute significantly to the regional economy, with over $2 million in annual tax revenue and over $2.5 billion in economic impact to the city. Through the digital revolution of the past 15 years, there's no question that the music industry has transformed dramatically and met the consumer need. In fact, more than any other creative industry, music is a digital business, with approximately 80% of our revenues coming from a wide array of digital services. We're grateful that the city and the committee has taken steps towards updating its code to reflect this new reality. This will facilitate the continued health presence and expansion of the music industry in Los Angeles. And we look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Walsh.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Walsh, and I'm here today on behalf of the Motion Picture Association of America with just some brief remarks. We understand that this motion is about an effort to modernize the current code, and we look forward to additional details on how it might be applied to our company's divisions. We would like the opportunity to work with the committee and the Office of Finance on this issue, and appreciate the opportunity to be involved in any stakeholder discussions going forward. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you very much. So, members, we got a sense as we had this discussion of sentiment, I think, and also some issues that remain still to be figured out. So what I'd suggest is that we request a report from the City Attorney's Office on appropriate definitions for digital goods and an analysis of the nature of goods and services in the context of traditional taxation and in the digital context for the variety of industries that are impacted by this. I'd also like to instruct the Office of Finance to analyze the potential revenue impacts of shifting taxable receipts on business activities related to digital products into a digital goods category, and then have those reports come back here for further consideration before we advance this forward. So, what would be a realistic? Actually, I should have said the CAO, I suppose, working with the Office of Finance. So, what would the CAO suggest to be a reasonable time frame to do so? 30 days?
You know, off the top of my head, I think the one thing that we need to do is look at the kind of businesses that would fall under the change and what the original intent was for the internet-based businesses, and just to make sure that we keep that definition, the revised definition, within that scope. You know, otherwise that's sort of what are we trying to change a policy goal? So I would guess, assuming that we can get the information from finance pretty quickly, just doing the numbers would be pretty quick, like maybe about 30 days. But as for the policy side and the research, that might be a little bit longer, so maybe 60 or 90.
Okay, let's say 60 days, and if you're not getting it done, you can let us know and we'll work with that. But I'd like to try to keep this on the track, on the track forward. So if there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee, and that will take us then to our closed session matters. Thank you all very much. So on closed session, all right. The Budget and Finance Committee is back in open session, and is there any other business before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
Seeing none, we are adjourned.